Okay, so we are here on the 4th of July. So this is a wondrous day, a day that we celebrate as our Day of Independence. And of course, one of the major themes of the founding of this great country was freedom of religion. So here we are practicing our freedom of religion and studying Torah and studying the deep secrets of the Torah. When we talk about freedom, there are two different levels of freedom. Eric Fromm discusses these two ideas. One is freedom to. You have the freedom to do whatever it is that you would like to do. And there's freedom from. So normally people are thinking about freedom from. We don't want to be oppressed. We don't want anyone putting their thoughts, their religion.
We can go to that seafood restaurant for chowder.
But really, as Jewish people, we're looking for freedom to reach the real freedom. We have to work on it and realize that when God took us out of Egypt, it wasn't just a freedom from Egypt, but it was a freedom to now tavdun et Elokim al hahar hazeh, to be able to serve God on this mountain. So that is just a little bit about the 4th of July. Now let's return to our mimer, to our discourse. We were discussing the mimer of Va'ata Tetzaveh, and I'm going to, we'll share the screen so we'll see a little bit of the mimer here. And you may have this printed out as well. If you received this, you can open up your own document. So we're going to just start reviewing the verse. The verse was, "You shall command the children of Israel, and they shall bring you pure olive oil, crushed for the light, to keep a constant lamp burning." And this was the commandment in the Torah to basically bring the olive oil that would be used for the lighting of the menorah. And the Rebbe had asked several questions. One of them is the main question: why does it say you will command? Va'ata tetzaveh et b'nei Yisrael. It should have said, like usual, it says in the Torah, tzav et b'nei Yisrael, command the Jewish people. But saying that you shall command, it's as if it's to say that Moshe is doing this action of commanding, when really Moshe is not commanding. Moshe is merely conveying the command of the Almighty. And then it says, they shall bring the pure olive oil to you, right? They'll bring you the pure olive oil. So let me ask you a question. If they were going to be creating pure olive oil for the lighting of the menorah, who would have been the most sensible person to bring it to? You'll have to unmute to answer.
Aaron.
Aaron was the one who lit the menorah. Aaron and his sons, they were the Kohanim, they lit the menorah. So why are they bringing the olive oil to Moshe? And then we say crushed for the light, crushed for the, literally in the Hebrew, la ma'or, for the luminary, for the source of light, and where it should have said crushed laha'ir, in order to illuminate, would have seemed to have made more sense. And then in this verse it says to keep a constant lamp burning, lahalot ner tamid, a continuous lamp. And in the next verse, as we see here, it says, well, it does. I didn't bring the other verse here, but then the following verse it says, "It shall be me'erev ad boker." It'll light from the morning to from the evening to the morning, which is in fact the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. The menorah lit from the evening until the morning. It wasn't a continuous, constant light. It was a daily light, and it was lit during the evening time. It was lit towards the evening, and it stayed lit through the entire night. So, but yet the first verse it says to keep a constant lamp burning. The second verse it says from evening till morning. These are the four questions. We're going to jump right into the answers that we gave, and this is all based, very important to remember, this is all based on a discourse from the previous Rebbe. So this is as I said at great length last week, the last discourse that the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave out, the last edited discourse that he gave out just 2 weeks before his incapacitating stroke. And so, as we are near the yahrzeit of the Rebbe was this Shabbos. That's why we're studying this discourse. And it is chock full of deep mystical ideas about faith that we'll be getting to starting today and more so next week. So this is all based, this discourse, and it's important to understand. You'll understand the discourse better if you understand that the Rebbe will be frequently referring back to the discourse of 5687. Do you remember the year 5687? 1927. How is that? You don't remember that year either, but at least the number makes sense to you. So this was a discourse that the previous Rebbe said in Moscow in 1927. Do you think in Moscow in 1927 it was a good idea to be reciting deep mystical ideas in public? Well, no, it wasn't a good idea. It wasn't a spectacular idea, because that was really the only way to overcome the wicked regime, was to hold our ground. And as I said last week, previous Rebbe 1, Soviet Union 0. So, as it turns out, but it was a long, painful stretch until we got to that. But nevertheless, so he was saying this discourse that we'll see was about having self-sacrifice for keeping Judaism. And he was, oftentimes a rabbi will speak about something, but he won't necessarily be fulfilling it. And certainly he won't be fulfilling it at the very time that he's speaking about it. If he's talking about doing acts of kindness, if the rabbi was going to fulfill an act of kindness while he was speaking, maybe he'd stop talking or make the speech a little shorter. But I'm kidding. But here the Rebbe was talking, excuse me, the Rebbe was talking about self-sacrifice, and he was at the very simultaneously, excuse me, he was practicing self-sacrifice because these were dangerous times in Moscow. And so this was the mimer V'kibel HaYehudim, which we'll be discussing shortly, a little bit about what this mimer was about, what the previous Rebbe was talking about. But anyway, we're going to now jump. The reason I'm mentioning it is that the Rebbe will be frequently referring back to this discourse of V'kibel HaYehudim of 1927. So the Rebbe explained there that the word tzav in Hebrew, we may remember this is something that is very significant, and I believe one of the most profound ideas that Hasidus shares regarding the idea of tzav, of a mitzvah, and tzav. What is tzav? So Hasidus brings the Talmudic connotation of this word that has to do with togetherness, bringing together. Tzavta v'chibur. It's about bringing together and connecting. So we're now going to reread the original verse of that this is all based on. And you shall command the children of Israel. Don't read it command, read it you shall connect the children of Israel. You shall connect the children of Israel with what? Who's the job of Moshe is to connect the Jewish people with?
Hashem.
Hashem, with God. And the way that we're putting Hashem here is with the Or Ein Sof. Anybody know what is the Or Ein Sof?
Light of God.
It is the infinite light of God. Yes, the infinite light of God. And when Hasidic philosophy, Kabbalah, refers to this terminology of Or Ein Sof, what it's talking about is the way that God really transcends even the name of God. Even when so much of our relating to God is a, let's just say, as Jewish people, we have simple faith and we relate to God as we relate to a father. But then when you start learning a little bit more, you start studying Jewish philosophy, and you start realizing who and what God is above and beyond any system whatsoever. So there's the way that God comes into a system, so to speak, and that's where God, so to speak, takes on a name. And so we have the name of God that we don't pronounce. So the name is really what we call a handle. Do you guys remember the CB lingo of the 70s? There was something called your handle. What's your handle? The handle was your name. What are you called by? Because the handle, of course, is what allows us to grasp on to the cup. That's the idea of a handle. Is the handle essential to the cup? No.
Yeah.
The handle. What if the handle broke off of this cup? Would it still be a cup?
Yes, you can hold it.
Would it still
Yeah,
serve
that's
its primary
the
function?
purpose.
Right? It was still right. The idea of a handle represents a relational tool, something that allows something from the outside to relate to it. Okay, and thus the name of God, which is transcendent, we call it the tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God. Right? It's above and beyond. Nevertheless, it's already a name. It's already, so to speak, a handle. It's a way to relate. Whereas when we're referring to the Or Ein Sof, we're talking about the way that God even transcends the name. So I'm just giving you an insight into the Kabbalistic nomenclature, the Hasidic nomenclature. When we talk about Or Ein Sof, we're referring to the way that God is above and beyond everything. And even to that level, we relate. We relate to the deepest, most profound, most transcendent aspect of God that we're referring to in this discourse as Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God. It's apple juice, not scotch. Don't worry. Not that anyone would worry if it was scotch. So,
Right.
It's a shame you're not sharing it. I'm making a joke.
oh, you mean the scotch, which it's not, right? No, it's actually meant to elevate my blood sugar. My blood sugar is going down, so the juice will bring it up. Scotch does something entirely different. Okay, back to the Or Ein Sof, back to the infinite light of God. So this is right here. We have the we have the answer to the first question, which I think is really extremely significant. This verse is telling us what the function of a Rosh B'nai Yisrael is. What does Rosh B'nai Yisrael means? The head of the Jewish people. What does that spell? I'll spell it out here for you on the page, since we're right here, and it's easy to do. I'm going to do it in the Hebrew. Rosh B'nai Yisrael. What's the initials or the acronym? Resh Bet Yud. Rabbi. Exactly. So that is Rabbi. That's the function of a Rebbe, of a Rabbi, of a teacher, of a leader of the Jewish people, is what? What we're saying right here, to connect the children of Israel with the Or Ein Sof. Va'ata tetzaveh et b'nei Yisrael. You shall connect the children of Israel with the Or Ein Sof. That's the function of a Rebbe, of a Jewish leader. If a Jewish leader, you don't find that a Jewish leader is connecting you with God and making a more meaningful and deep connection, maybe you have to work on your connection with the leader better, or maybe you need to find a different leader of the Jewish people. And now to answer the second question, this is reviewing from last week still. And they shall bring you pure olive oil. They shall bring you pure olive oil. So the Rebbe explains. The Rebbe explained in the discourse, again, based on the previous Rebbe discourse, through connecting the Jewish people Moshe gains. Moshe gains from this. The olive oil is symbolic of divine wisdom. Okay? I'm getting some feedback here. So if everyone could please mute, I can mute everyone. But sorry, but unmute when you want to share something, please. But otherwise, stay muted because we're getting the feedback is coming.
Rabbi, some people don't know how to mute themselves. I think you have to mute everybody and have the person who wants to ask a question unmute.
No problem. That is what we'll do. Participants, here we go. Mute all. Okay. And you're all muted, so if you want to unmute, you can press your space bar or you can unmute yourself and speak up, please. Okay. So, what does it mean that they will, and they shall bring you pure olive oil? So pure olive oil represents the divine wisdom. And so you are going to gain from the fact that you connect the Jewish people with the infinite light of God. You, Moshe, are going to gain. You're going to gain from this. And that answers now the first two questions. Now, I want to remind you again, our objective isn't to, okay, let's make sure we answer all the questions. We're going to answer the questions, but really the focus of studying Chassidus is getting the deep Chassidic idea. And since we're on this topic of connecting, that the word tzav means connection, of course, now we also have, this is not discussed in the discourse, but just a very important idea. Oftentimes people ask about what is the significance of a mitzvah? What is the meaning of a mitzvah? Well, a mitzvah, of course, means a commandment. It is something that God is commanding us to do. But Chassidus now reveals that there's another element going on, and that is a mitzvah is about connection. And so we should never think for a moment that we have to do a mitzvah. We should think always that we get to do a mitzvah. That should be our frame of mind. Now, by the way, that's an ideal. I'm not saying that I've reached that ideal yet, okay? But whenever I find myself thinking that I have to do a mitzvah, I try to shift that around to realize, no, I get to do a mitzvah because this is a connection with God. How am I worthy to connect with God? I have no idea, but he still is giving me the mitzvah, so God wants me to perform the mitzvah. What an unbelievable opportunity. And sometimes it's a very easy mitzvah to do and very enjoyable mitzvah to do, like eating cholent on Shabbos. Here, I'm going to connect with God through having enjoyment on Shabbos, right? It's not so difficult. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult. Ahavat Yisrael can sometimes be very enjoyable mitzvah to perform, and sometimes it takes great inner strength to perform that mitzvah. All right, moving right along.
Rabbi?
Yes.
But the underlying concept, shouldn't it be Idu Hashem b'simcha always?
There you go. That's that's going to be when we realize what a great merit it is for us to perform a mitzvah. Then obviously we're going to do it b'simcha, with joy, with great happiness. So well said, Yisrael. Thank you. However, if we're not at that level, do the mitzvah until you get there, right? Don't ever hold yourself back from doing the mitzvah. Sometimes people think, I'm just not feeling it. That's okay. Do it anyway. And tomorrow you'll feel it.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
Where in the Torah does it tell us that we need an intermediary to connect to God?
Bum, bum. Bum, bum.
My impression was we never needed anybody to connect to God. I connect to God all day long, every day, and I don't have. He performs miracles for me every day.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful, and that's true. What you're saying is very true. So it's a very good question that you ask. So I'm going to address it as best as I can. And thank you for bringing it up. Is that Phyllis?
No, it's Susan Resnick, and I'm sorry I put you on the spot, but I'd rather put you on the spot and know what you have to say about it.
Please put me on the spot. That's what I'm here for. I'm here for you to put me on the spot. And if you can correct me.
One more thing, Rabbi. I have COVID. I just diagnosed myself with COVID today. And I'm sitting here watching the class because it's very important to me. So if I leave the class, I'm going to cover the screen because I have to lay down.
Okay, wow, look at that. Beautiful.
So you tell me God doesn't give me miracles.
Yes, he does. He does indeed. And that is so heartwarming, uplifting, and true. So that's that is what you're saying is a very true point. And let me try to address that as best as I can. What I'm sharing with you is a notion that is found in the Torah, spoken about from the rabbis of the Talmud. And I think it's important to understand, and this is going to be obvious to many of us here, but in any case, it's an important thing to understand. Sometimes I'm asked, usually by not Jewish people, do I believe in the Bible? And I tell them, no, I don't believe in the Bible. I believe in the Torah. The Torah that we have has got two parts to it. The written Torah, which are the 5 books of Moses, right? And then we have the oral tradition, which was some of the oral tradition was God explaining it to Moses. Some of the oral tradition was God explaining to Moshe how to interpret the Torah. And some of it was how the rabbis, who are the experts, the legal experts in Torah law, were empowered to create new mitzvot in the Torah. For example, Hanukkah and Purim. They're not mentioned in the Torah, right? Where does it say in the Bible that we should keep Hanukkah? Well, does it? Does it say in the Torah that we shall keep it? Did God command us to keep Hanukkah? One second, don't we say a blessing? Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has commanded us to light the Hanukkah menorah? Wait, how can we recite that blessing? It's a lie. It's untrue. So how can we? How can we say that blessing? God did not command us to light the menorah. How can we say a blessing with God's name that's untrue? And this is all going to be a preface, Susan, to help address, to help answer your question. So Maimonides tells us, and this is, again, the rabbinic way of looking at it, which is what we believe. The Torah is the written Torah and the oral tradition. We, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has commanded us to follow the institutions of the rabbi, who have commanded us to light the Hanukkah menorah. And so any blessing that we're saying over a mitzvah that is not from the Torah is because the rabbis instituted it. Who can tell me another mitzvah like that that was instituted by the rabbis? It's not in the Torah. Louder? Purim, right? So the blessing that we say over reading the Megillah, very good. Another one that we do every single day. If you're observant and observing this mitzvah, you'd be doing it every single day, maybe even more than once a day. You say this blessing over the washing of the hands. Where does it say in the Torah you shall wash your hands? Nowhere. Not for waking up in the morning and not for bread. Lighting of Shabbat candles, right? So these are many of the examples that nevertheless, the rabbis instituted these mitzvot. They are rabbinic commandments. They're not Torah commandments, but they are rabbinic commandments. And we follow them because we follow the Torah. If we were believers in the Bible, maybe we wouldn't celebrate Hanukkah and we wouldn't celebrate Purim and we wouldn't wash our hands and we wouldn't light Shabbat candles. Anyway, enough about that.
I understand now.
Now, that's a preface to my next point, which is that the Torah tells us to attach ourselves to God, okay? that we should attach ourselves to God. V'davakta bo, you shall attach yourself to God. The rabbis ask, how could you attach yourself to God? The language of the rabbis is God is an all-consuming fire. Basically, God, if we would attach ourselves to God himself directly without anything, we would, to God, attaching ourselves to God himself, we would become totally incorporated within God. We would cease to exist. And this has happened to people, by the way. So the rabbis interpret it and say the following. Hidabek b'talmidei chachamim. You shall attach yourselves to the Torah scholar. U'ma'alei alav hakatuv, and the Torah will consider it as if you had attached yourself to God himself. Okay? There's another verse in, where is this from? This is in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5, verse 5. I'll bring up the English for you in a moment.
This is V'eschanan.
This is V'eschanan. That's the book of Devarim.
Yeah.
Book of Devarim. I stood between the Lord and you at that time to tell you the word of the Lord. So this idea that I have stood between you and the Lord, right? Because you were afraid because of the fire, and went up, and I went up and went not up on the mountain, saying, right now is not right. Right now you have the 10 Commandments. So very, very good, good catch there. Yes, this is the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy. And here we have, I stood between the Lord and you at that time. So again, the Torah itself is telling us this idea that Moshe is an intermediary. But I would like to, so the idea of the intermediary, let me help you. I'm going to want to flesh this out a little bit more. I want to spend a little bit of time because your question is a very good question, Susan, and a very important one. Okay, because this idea of somebody else attaching us to God, pardon the idea, but Jewish people think, 1 second, that sounds like Christianity. Right? Is there anybody here who had a thought that maybe this sounds a little like Christianity? If you've been learning Hasidic philosophy for several years or something, or you're familiar with the Hasidic ways, you're not going to think that. But
I want to say something, if you don't mind.
I want to get back to this idea. If it's connected, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say we are told two things about wishing or asking God for things. We are told that we can do it directly, and we are told that it's even better to do it to a tzaddik. And a tzaddik can bring it out for you. So it's not always that you have to do it yourself.
Okay. You know what? First of all, that's a good point that you're saying. And you're getting into a whole other area of making requests of God through a tzaddik, or should you do it yourself? I don't want to open up that canister, okay? It's a wonderful thing to talk about, and there are different ways of looking at it, and they're all true. I just want to focus, though, it's adjacent to what we're talking about, but I want to keep focused on this one idea, okay?
Okay.
So how have we learned about God, who God is, what God is? Personally?
Rabbi, I think you have to mute again. It sounds like somebody's eating crackers.
Oh, my goodness.
Maybe they have mice. I don't know.
All right, participants. Okay, there we go. Mute all. Okay, enjoy your crackers. Okay, so, and Baruch Hashem, your speakers are very good. Your microphone, rather, your mic is a very good mic. Getting back to the idea, Susan's question, right? The idea of an intercessor, an intermediary. So, Judaism believes in many things, and Christianity distorted it, okay? Unfortunately, for so many Jewish people, their belief in Judaism isn't really about God. I don't believe in Christianity. I don't believe in Jesus. Do you believe in God? Not really, but I don't believe in Jesus, right? This becomes their whole idea. Like, for instance, something that I'm sure everybody here is aware of, do Jewish people believe in the coming of the Messiah? So there are a lot of Jewish people who thought for a long time, and who still think, that the idea of a Messiah is a Christian idea. What? What? This is an absolutely Jewish idea that they took and they distorted. Okay, so we have to be careful. Now, there are many groups of Jewish people and even observant Jewish people who don't have this idea of a Rebbe, of connecting with a Jewish leader in this kind of a way. So it's not popular amongst many other groups. Amongst many groups, Hasidic groups, Sephardic groups, and other groups as well, it is a very popular idea. But I want to give you where it's based on in the Talmud. So I was quoting to you from the Talmud earlier, that the Talmud itself says that one should attach themselves to Torah scholars. This is counted as if they are attaching themselves to God. I brought you the verse in the Torah where Moshe says, I am standing between you and between God, because the story in the Torah was the Jewish people were not able to hear directly from God. It was not just a mind-blowing experience, it was a life-blowing experience. It blew away their life. They couldn't take it. So Moshe said, I will give you the information. Now, one more idea, and that is, very practically, I have learned about God in the most meaningful and deep ways, in the most profound ways, in ways that are beyond what I could possibly imagine, through the teachings of the Rebbe, who brought the teachings of his Rebbe and the previous Rebbes, right? And the teachings of the Alter Rebbe. So here's another example of, so to speak, intermediation, right? We don't normally think of it. Or if I'm studying Rambam, and the Rambam is explaining to me what our notion of believing in one God is really about. So that means, is the Rambam an intermediary? Well, yes, he is. So think of an intermediary, Susan.
Not an intermediary, he's a teacher. He taught you what to do.
There
He's
you
not
go.
a channel.
Much more clear when you
He's
say.
not a channel. You don't daven through the Rebbe.
Right.
Okay, so
And you
very
don't
good.
daven to the Rebbe.
Thank you very
Ask
much.
the Rebbe to daven with you, gesundheit. Talk to him and ask him to daven with you. But when you daven, you talk directly to Hashem and nobody else.
Very good. Beautiful. Isaac, beautifully said. Thank you for sharing, right? So that's clarifying.
Very welcome, anytime.
And with such enthusiasm.
Rabbi.
So just 1 second. I just want to continue on that note. So the idea is certainly never that we are praying to a tzaddik. We are asking the tzaddik to intercede on our behalf, perhaps, or we're praying to God with the help of the tzaddik. But the idea of an intermediary isn't saying that you can't reach God. It's not saying that you don't have a pathway to God. But this is an extra boost and another way for us that empowers us to connect. Not necessarily different than a teacher. Okay, so a teacher, so there are different types of teachers. But here I'm talking about teachers that are giving us the core and source information. So I'm a teacher, but I'm sharing with you what I've learned from the core teachers, from the source teachers, right? So in a sense, that's also an element of the intermediation. So it's not an intermediation because we can't connect with God, but what it allows us to do is to connect on a much deeper way, which is going to be really what this discourse is talking about. So that I think I've spent enough time answering. And again, I took the time to answer it because it's an important question. And oftentimes you can go to an Orthodox synagogue and you won't hear anybody ever talking about connecting to a tzaddik or a tzaddik connecting you to God. You'll never hear it. It's not really in their, shall we say, in their corpus of beliefs, right? They have, although they are also coming around. They also have many, of course, they have in the Orthodox world, you have some very great giants, and people are coming to realize, we really need to revere these people, not worship, but revere, right? Another connection to July 4th, Paul Revere. Anyway, so very important distinction. Okay, we're going to move on with the discourse, but thank you for bringing that up. And I will at times answer questions, and I'll answer them at length when it's something which is really essential to what we're talking about, as I felt Susan's questions was. Sometimes I'll answer it in very short ways. Sometimes I'll say I'll answer it. I'll talk about it afterwards. Okay. moving on with the discourse. So now we have the answers to the question. So Moshe's efforts to influence the Jewish people, connecting them with the Or Ein Sof, increases and enhances Moshe's own spiritual power. Okay, and this is what we spoke about last week. Okay, now we're going to go on to part 3 in the mimer, part 3 in the discourse, to explain the above in the mimer, V'kibel HaYehudim. The previous Rebbe prefaces the above concept with an explanation of our sages, with our sages' description of Moshe Rabbeinu as a Raya Mehemna. Okay, so this is going to be a very important terminology here in this discourse, Raya Mehemna. Raya Mehemna is an Aramaic word. The Hebrew is Roeh Ne'eman, and in English it has 2 possible translations, as we're about to see. The regular translation is a faithful shepherd. When you say faithful, what does faithful mean? Someone you can rely on, right? Someone that's always there for you. So there are 2 interpretations of this term: A faithful shepherd, and B, a shepherd of faith. That is, that he sustains and nurtures the faith of the Jewish people. Okay? So if he is a shepherd of faith, so a normal shepherd is a shepherd of grass. He's shepherding the sheep and bringing them to graze, so they'll eat and be sustained with their physical sustenance. So the Raya Mehemna, who the Zohar refers to Moshe Rabbeinu as the Raya Mehemna, he wasn't just a faithful shepherd, but he was a shepherd that sustained us. He inculcated us with this divine faith. Now, there's a problem, and it's similar to Susan's question of just a moment ago. It's a similar question, which is 1 second. I need Moshe to provide faith. I need another tzaddik, another righteous person to provide me with faith. I believe in God. I'm a believer. And this is so what do we mean by that? And now, in the words of the Rebbe is going to ask this exact question. Now, the Jewish people have inherent resources of faith. For the Jewish people, the Talmud in Shabbat calls the Jewish people Ma'aminim b'nei Ma'aminim. We are believers, the sons of believers. So the faith of the Jewish people is seen to be something that is just part of who they are. We believe. So there's a question here, right? The question is, if Jewish people are natural believers, how can we say that Moshe is giving them faith? That what Jewish people have faith, we believe in God. But now the Rebbe is going to explain it. It's going to answer that question. It is, however, possible for this belief merely to serve as an encompassing force without being internalized within a person's conscious thought process. Okay? In simpler words, we can believe, but it's possible that that belief is not going to affect our decision-making process. I believe, but, sometimes there are temptations. So let's talk about, it's the summertime and people are going to a fair, you're bringing your children or grandchildren to a county fair, to the state fair, and says that if you're 12 and older, it costs this amount of money, it costs $40, and if you're under 12, it's only $15. Now, you have a grandchild who looks like he's 10 years old, but he's actually 12. Has anybody ever encountered a situation like this? I'm sure we have. And some people are naturally more ethical and honest, and some of us are looking to, save a buck more, a little bit more than the ethics. No judgment. Hey, we all have to deal with our own personality. But I have known religious, observant Jewish people who believe in God, who have gone up to the counter and said, yeah, he's 10 years old. And we start making excuses, right? We say, well, you know what? They expect that we're going to do that. You know this one? You've seen this justification before? That the fair expects that he's going to do that, and that's why they put the number over here instead. It really meant 14, but that, right? People start making excuses to save $15, right? Now, if you believe in God, and you believe that God gives you your sustenance, then how should you act? You should. There's no question that you follow. You pay more money. You pay another $15, $20 because God is in control, and I have full belief in God. I'm using this example, but there's so many examples. This is just one that I was thinking about the other day in our county. The county fair is here, so it was reminding me of this challenge, right? Of this yearly challenge, right? And for $20, you get to teach your child a lesson in how to be an ethical, moral person. Wow, what a deal. But aside from that, we believe in God. If we believe in God and God is taking care of us, how would we ever try to cheat the system? However, you might know that non-observant Jewish people try to do it. Okay, well, that's a natural thing that human beings want to do. But an observant Jew, a believing Jew, why should they want to cheat the system? If they have belief in God. Well, here's the problem. Herein lies the rub. I believe in God, but that belief has not become internalized to the degree that it affects my decision-making processes. We understand the difference. And thus the Talmud talks about a very interesting situation. There was Yankel the Ganef. The Talmud doesn't refer to him as Yankel the Ganef, but Yaakov the thief. There was Yankel the Ganef, and he was about to perform he was about to break into a home where he knew there was a lot of stuff, and he knew exactly how he was going to get in, but he felt he wanted God's help. Any endeavor a Jewish person is doing, God, please help me out. So he prays to God, God, please help me on my next job. Ganva apum machtarta rachmana karya, the Talmud says. So 1 second, he believes in God. Obviously, he's praying to God that God should help him. But that belief has not penetrated his real existence. It hasn't penetrated his and this is what the Rebbe is saying here in the Mimer. It's possible that this belief is encompassing, meaning it's superficial. A person believes it in a superficial way, but it hasn't penetrated them. Moshe Rabbeinu nurtures the faith of the Jewish people, enabling them to internalize this potential. Similar concepts are echoed by the Zohar, which states, this supernal faith will be sustained and nurtured by you, Moshe. This nurturing process involves internalizing the potential. Internalizing, right? That's the key word. Internalizing the potential faith. So we have this potential faith, or this more superficial faith, which might be very, very deep. It might be so deep that it doesn't affect us. Or in other words, it's superficial. And what the Zohar says is that the job of Moshe is to nurture this faith, that we actually maintain that faith, that it turns into what we call trust, right? So if a person has faith in God, they won't necessarily have trust in God. But when you have internalized that, faith that God is here with me right now at this moment, taking care of me, now my actions are going to conform to that faith. That means that I've put my trust in God. And this is the function of Moshe. And to some degree, Susan, this answers your question, if you're still with us, that we all have the faith, right? We all know, I'm sure we know Jewish people who don't have the faith, but however we're to understand, we're not going to answer that question. But that's the general quality of the Jewish people. We might have the faith, but the job of the Moshe Rabbeinu is to bring that faith to a more deeper level. Now, we're now going to move on to another concept. Okay, so number one, we've spoken about the faith, the connection. The connection occurs that Moshe connects us with the Or Ein Sof. He connects us. We're getting the idea here through faith. The faith that we're talking about is the more internalizing, that we internalize, that we're able to, through the help of the tzaddik, the Moshe Rabbeinu, we're able to internalize that faith. Now, this mimer of the previous Rebbe, V'kibel HaYehudim, continues emphasizing that the designation of Moshe as the shepherd of faith applies not only to Moshe Rabbeinu, who led the Jews out of Egypt, but to the extension of Moshe in all generations. So the Zohar has this terminology that there is an extension of Moshe and an ispashtusa de Moshe b'chol dara v'dara, that you have the Moshe of each and every generation. It's interesting, by the way, that even in the Talmud, there are a couple of places where the rabbis speaking to each other will refer to each other as Moshe. Interesting. But every generation has its leader of generation, which is an extension of Moshe. Those are the heads of the thousands of the Jewish people in every generation who reinforce the faith of the Jews of their generation, enabling them to internalize the faith. So what we've been taking for granted now, I think probably since we started learning this, is that we're not just talking about Moshe, right? We're talking about the Moshe of every generation. And the Rebbe continues in the mimer, again quoting from the previous Rebbe. For example, Mordechai served as the extension of Moshe in his generation. As reflected in the sages, in the statement of our sages, Mordechai in his generation as Moshe in his generation. Let me just quickly share that medrash with you. So many windows. I know I've got it here somewhere. Here we go. So it says, Ish Yehudi, there was a man in Shushan, Habira, in the castle of Shushan. Now the word man here tells us that Mordechai in his generation was equal to Moshe in his. For of Moshe too, it is written, now the man Moshe was very meek, Ish Moshe. So who's referred to, who's the man? Who is the man? The man in the first pasuk is, in the source pasuk here was Mordechai, and that's also the man is Moshe Rabbeinu. And one of the rabbinic forms of deriving ideas is comparing a word usage in one place to word usage in another place and saying that these two are compared. So just like Moshe was called the man, Mordechai is also called Ish Yehudi. He was also called the man. And the Medrash goes on very beautifully. Just as Moshe stood in the breach, therefore he said that he would destroy them had not Moshe as chosen stood before them in the breach. So did Mordechai, as it's written, seeking the good for the people and speaking peace to all his seed. Basically taking the Jews back from the brink of destruction is basically what we're talking about. Just as Moshe taught Israel Torah, well, that's pretty obvious, right? Behold, I have taught you statutes and ordinances, so did Mordechai, as it says, and he sent letters with words of peace and truth. And truth here means Torah, as it's written elsewhere, that shows that the truth really is referring to Torah. All right, I just felt it's nice to learn some of the source materials inside that the Rebbe is bringing here in the mimer. All right, so this is the idea, the medrash that was from Medrash Rabbah, from Esther Rabbah, chapter 6, section 2. That tells us that Mordechai in his generation was just like Mordechai in his generation, bringing many, many comparisons. So even in the time of Haman, when the study of the Torah and the observance of its mitzvahs involved Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, Mordechai called together clusters of people who studied Torah communally to strengthen the Jews' faith in God and motivate them to stand strong in the study of the Torah and the observance of its mitzvahs. So this is an idea that if you read the Megillah, you're not going to necessarily know this. If you read the rabbinic literature on the Megillah, then you will know this. So I'm just going to emphasize this because this is not in the Megillah. You know, you read through the Megillahs. I don't remember that in the story. So this is again from the rabbinic interpretation, from the Talmud and from the Medrash, that when Haman made his decree, Mordechai gathered together 22,000 children and studied Torah day and night, and encouraged the Jewish people to increase in their study of Torah. So this was an act of Mesiras Nefesh. This was an act of self-sacrifice. And I want to underscore once again, this idea is being taken from the mimer of the previous Rebbe of 1927. As the Rebbe was teaching this idea, where was he? In Moscow, under the Soviet regime. So this is not just a description of, this is the manifestation of, this is the living of Mesirat Nefesh, of teaching Torah with self-sacrifice. This gives us a whole different appreciation of this.
I want to ask one more question. Nowhere does any Rebbe ever say only men can learn. They say men and women can learn Torah. Isn't that correct?
Well, yes, the Rebbe has definitely said that, and many others. I can't tell you there's no one who says otherwise. There's a lot of Rebbes out there.
Yeah. No, I understand.
And they're entitled to their opinion.
Exactly.
So after the Mimer explains at length that Moshe and the extension of Moshe in every generation strengthens the faith of the Jewish people. Okay, so let's take that apart piece by piece. So we have number one, we have Moshe, and we have the extension of Moshe, right? That was one new idea here, again, in the Mimer, right? That we're not just talking about Moshe, but the extension of Moshe in every generation. And what do? They strengthen the faith of the Jewish people, right? That's what they're doing. They are the Raya Mehemda. They are not just faithful shepherds, but they are the shepherds of faith. So it proceeds to explain the verse's choice of words that we said above. This was our third question, crushed for the luminary. And I like the word luminary, ma'or. Ma'or actually means luminary. Yes, Natalie.
I'm sorry, I don't look presentable. That's why
That's quite all right. Your box here with your name looks entirely presentable.
Okay, so I think we have to look at this, what you're teaching now about Rebbe, previous Rebbe Mimer, in the concept of him being really the Moshe of his generation, because where he was at that time, it's not necessarily maybe applicable into our time. He sacrificed his life and maybe life of his family, and he knew that. And if you take this literally and put it in our time, it's not gonna apply. Who's sacrificing that life in our time? Maybe eventually, unfortunately, we come in United States and it's getting there very, very slowly, creeping in anti-Semitism, but not now.
Very interesting. Natalie, this is such an interesting point that you bring out, because that's going to be, what you're saying right now is going to be the initial point of the discourse. But eventually what the Rebbe is going to continue explaining based on other ideas brought in the discourse is that this idea of the leader inculcating us with faith is not just about giving up our lives for God, but ultimately living our lives for God. And we're going to get into that, but it's a very good point that you make. You're right. At this point, the whole idea is self-sacrifice, and that's going to be relevant for Mordechai in his generation. That's going to be relevant for the previous Rebbe in his generation. But for our generation, you're right. It would seem that it doesn't apply, but let's leave an open mind and we'll see. I think we're coming to a conclusion of our time here, so we'll continue on this theme. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'm happy to address, but we'll
It's all good. I want to apologize if in any way I understand the business about our Rebbe is tops, which is fine for the common man, for the rest, for anyone in Yiddishkeit, can't argue with Lubavitch and the incredible thing that Lubavitch has done. I just get very sensitive when we start going a little bit too far, and I understand it's done to get the intensity of the people or whatever. I personally just find it difficult in terms of that. Learn from the Rebbe. As I said here in my note, my father always said, you have to learn from all the Rebbes. It is all Torah Moshe Sinai. Every one of them. And I grew up in the Cheshire house. He lived across the street from me. We went to Bavel for Shabbos.
What was his name? What was his name? Which
Cheshire Rebbe? Rav Sholem. The last name was Halberstam, I think it was. He had a pass to the Vatican. He used to sneak in and get Kisvei Yad and work on things from the Vatican, but he was through Bavel. He was an offshoot of Bavel. I used to go to the Bavel
right,
every Friday night. Sholem Halberstam. Actually, his son-in-law now is the current Boston Rebbe. It's his son-in-law who married his daughter.
I see.
But whatever. All I'm saying is all Rebbes are worthy of studying and learning and incorporating. My father said you have to listen to all the Rebbes and you have to watch out for all the Hasidim. That's my only point. That's all I was saying, is the exuberance.
All right. I want to, you know what? There is a, listen, there is a, in Chabad or in many different Hasidic groups, the larger the groups, the more extremism you're going to come and experience with people who get carried away. We're bringing across an idea here, and I'd like to share that we're talking about connection, right? And how a Rebbe, I'm not going to even say the Rebbe, a leader is able to instill within us something deeper than just knowledge.
Yes.
Okay?
And that's what
the point
the other says, Asay L'cha Rav. Nobody can do it independently, because you start getting off into the cream cheese. You follow your own eyes. You must have someone above you that you follow. You follow in their way, you try to copy their midos, whatever it is, you must have a leader. And you can't pick a rabbi for every instance. You ask half the people around now, who's your rabbi? They can't tell you, because they go Friday night to one shul, they go Shabbos morning to another, and they listen. For kosher, we call him, and for Shabbos, we call him.
Right.
People are just deceiving themselves into Gehenna, which is fine. Just fine if they want to. But you have to have a Rav, one Rav that you follow along all things.
Isaac, you're getting a little far afield, and I'd like to. We'll come back to this next week. And by the way, this is going to be the thrust of the whole discourse, really talking about a connection, an internal connection that we're able to get from a Rebbe, any leader that we decide is going to be our leader.
Rav, right? Somebody besides you, somebody above you.
Right, and what you're saying is another point, an important point. We're gonna break here because it is already 1:01, and I was last.
Thank you so much for this discourse. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I goes into everybody and stay safe.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Before Shalema.
Yeah, Susan.
Yeah, Refuah Shlema.
Susan.